So that was great. I mean, I'm really enjoying the back and forth and the dialogue we're having. I just wanted to say that just as the gentleman in the back was speaking, I was thinking to myself that, yes, we're increasing awareness amongst or within the community, but, you know, you're teaching us a lot. I mean, I'm learning as I'm listening, so please continue and let's keep this up. 2 points I want to make. I know that some of you all still have questions, probably for John. John has to leave. He's on the consult service, and Raj had to step out. He may come back. You have these cards, so write your question down, put it in the box outside, and we will post responses to those questions. Secondly, we have clinical trial information in the back of the room, and we have a number of people who are here to give you additional information. So if you have questions, want to know more, want to be linked to trials, this is a resource for you. So let's move on to our clinical trial participant panel. Larry Day is going to moderate that panel, and I'm going to let him do his leadership thing because that's what Larry does. Mario and Earl, do you want to come to the front of the room? Guys can just have a seat. Yeah. I just want to say that Larry is a leader within our CFAR CAB, and he's one of the directors over at the Boston Living Center. But he's also a colleague of mine and someone who I consider to be a friend. So, and he's excellent at doing these types of sessions. I've heard him and seen him in action, so this is really going to be interesting. Thanks, Larry.
It should be. Actually, I'm really looking forward to this. You know, so far we've heard from two really knowledgeable researchers. But the reality is, as good as that research may be, without the input of community members, it wasn't going to happen. Now, you know, for many of us, now I'm somebody who's living with HIV myself, for us, those of us in the room right now who are living with HIV, this is more than a passion or a job or something that, you know, you see on a wall and write down a number. This is the search for the Holy Grail. And it doesn't matter if you've been living with HIV for 6 months or 20 plus years, like myself and so many others in the room right now that I know and have known over these last couple of decades. And that these two people have decided to take that step and move forward with this. It's remarkable, and I commend you both. So that gives us a really unique opportunity right now to actually talk and dialogue with folks who have done this. And I'm really interested in hearing your stories. And thank you, Mario, and thank you, Earl. So let's begin. If you could, this is for the both of you, could you tell me a little bit about yourselves and when you were diagnosed and what kind of challenges did you face living with HIV? Do you, Chase?
Sure. So I was diagnosed in 2004. It was a big surprise to me. It was a very difficult time for me. Within a short period of time, about a month, I went on highly active antiretroviral therapy. I was undetectable 4 months after I went on therapy. So became positive, went on therapy a month later, and then 4 months later, I was undetectable. So I'm now 14 years HIV positive. I've been undetectable consistently for 14 years. I've had no medical issues that directly relate to HIV. Why do I think I've had this happen to me? This great fortune of not having medical issues or not having any kind of a problem with being positive, medical problem I should say, is that very early on I took a very active role in taking care of myself. And I spent a very, very short period of time being lost. And I spent very early on, I took control of my life, and I kind of defied what I was being told, because I was being told that, you know, HIV has a control, it can control your life, that you have no control over the virus aside from just taking your medicine, but ultimately the virus will do what it wants And so in 2004, there were people who were having some success and some people were not having a lot of success. And so my theory is that I have to take control as much possible of the virus. And so I attribute a big portion of my success to a nutritionist I found and met with in the early months of being positive, who taught me something that to this day I still live by. And he said, from now on, you're running a marathon. Think of yourself as a marathon runner, because you're going to be around for a long, long time. But in order to do that, you're going to have to take really good care of your health. So that has been really, really beneficial. I changed my diet. I learned how nutrition has a huge role in the body. I have taken my medicine every single day, and I can tell you with 100% honesty to this very day, 14 years later, I have never missed one dose. Now that might not sound like a lot to people who are HIV negative, but to go 14 years, it has been a challenge at times, because implementing 3 different methods every day that remind me, and always being conscious of that. But again, I was told early on, I'm running a marathon. You want to be a marathon runner? This is what you have to do. You have to train like you're a marathon runner. And that's what I've done. So I train, I eat well, I take my medicine, I educate myself about what HIV is and how it's changing in the world, like the education, the progression of the improvements in HIV care. So I kind of just have embraced all that. And a big part of that is also helping other people and also understanding research and understanding where we are in terms of caring for people who are HIV positive, preventing people from becoming HIV positive, and prolonging our life. I would have to say at this point, it's really weird to even say this, but I'm actually proud to be HIV positive, because it is through being HIV positive that I've been able to help so many people as a support group leader, as a research volunteer, as just meeting people on the street who are HIV positive and or HIV negative, and teaching them a little bit about what HIV is and about what it's like living with HIV, and kind of, spreading the word, ending the stigma that goes along with HIV, which is a huge, very important to me, is to try to get people to understand HIV, people who are HIV negative. And so, the pride may not be in the fact that I got HIV, but the pride comes from what I've done with HIV. It's how the obstacle was presented to me, and I embraced it. And although I still fight with it, I've overcome it. I guess, yeah. Just looking at my notes, and I stressed to you about how research can also, being involved in research, can also be a huge component to your health. Like, we think of maintaining our health as taking our medicine or eating right, but giving back and doing things for other people is an amazing form of medicine, because you can never feel bad for yourself if you're helping other people feel good. And so, that brings me so much peace to know that I'm doing things for others. And with research, you're doing things for people you won't even see. These people will never know you existed. And that's really, that's pretty profound, that you're involved in some of these studies that put you way out of your comfort level, and you're doing it for people that you don't even know who they are, and they'll never know who you are. That's a high level to ask for. And I commend everybody who's done it, and I encourage you to do it, because I think you will feel what I have felt, that wow, you think about where we are today as HIV positive people. The medicines we have today, the effectiveness of this medicine can be attributed directly to people who were in our place, who took medicine and did research, and the proceeds of their efforts is our life. Right? And think about people who are on PrEP, like the millions of people who are no longer getting HIV because HIV-positive people were involved in research that created the existence of PrEP. It's profound.
Thank you, brother. Earl, tell us a little bit about yourself and when you were diagnosed and what kind of
Yes.
challenges you
Yes, my name is Earl. I was diagnosed in 2011. And just to change it up a little bit, I kind of want to let you know that I'm originally from northern Maine, and you're probably asking yourself, like, what the hell does that have to do with being HIV positive? Well, a couple of things. One, I can rollerblade on a dirt road like a boss. And I also know I'm from Maine because my grandmother would shoot groundhogs from the kitchen windows. So that gives me, I know I'm from Maine. Unfortunately, however, growing up in Maine, one of the things I did not have a lot of access to was information, and my parents could not teach me what they didn't know. You cannot teach a child what you don't know yourself. So in 1989, when I first heard of HIV, I looked on the back of one of my father's magazines, which was a very good magazine. It probably wasn't science related, but anyway, so I looked on the back of that magazine, and the funny thing was, there was a number on there, and it said, if you feel as though you're HIV positive, call this number. I called that number every Thursday night for nearly a year. And when I say rural Maine, we had an outhouse, we got water from a brook down the road. But this gentleman that picked up on the other end of the line every Thursday at 7 o'clock, he gave me my first education on HIV and AIDS. And I guess as I sit here today, I was so incredibly ignorant. So incredibly ignorant about HIV. I was that guy who would not date, who would not go near someone that had HIV. I didn't want to touch you. And as some higher power, or perhaps God, as you would say, it turned out that I later had HIV. And then it was time to learn. It was time to become involved. It was time to make a lot of apologies to a lot of folks. So I would have to say that the reason that I am here is indeed what Dr. Lee had actually said, and that is the potential to help someone else, the potential to educate someone so they're not turning away someone from a hug because you might think that they have HIV. And in closing, I will say I'm kind of the polar opposite of Mario in one regard. When I first got diagnosed, I didn't take my meds all the time. I actually took them fairly rarely. I turned to alcohol and drugs as a part of coping with that. You just want to escape, you want to get away. By the grace of something, I am here, I am undetectable. I was just recently involved in a study and, in my mind, had some very positive results. So I just want to say to the individual out there that, perhaps you're not the marathon runner, maybe you're more of a 50-yard dash kind of guy. You can still live a very, very long life. And I'll just close with this very last thing. I went to a doctor that I work with over at the Brigham, and the first day I became realized I was HIV positive, I sat on his couch, and I sat back and I said, Dr. Milford, I just found out I'm HIV positive. I think I'm gonna die. And he looked at me and he said, you're not gonna die of HIV. Look at your gut. You're gonna die of a heart attack. So I'll just close with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good. Can you talk a little bit about the study that you were involved in?
Sure, and thank you for asking that. I was actually involved in the study that Dr. Lee was speaking about. You know, as he was talking about it, several things came to mind. And first of all, I just want to give a shout out to some of the wonderful nurses. There was Cheryl, Olivia, Louisa, and I believe towards the end there was Alexandria. You know, if you ever have to get your blood drawn, they are the folks to do it. They were absolutely amazing. You know, I must say I am a middle-aged white man, and I realize I have many privileges with that. I work at the Brigham. I had to go up 4 flights of stairs to be involved in that study. So again, I realize that's a privilege that not everyone has. But when I went up there and, you know, Dr. Lee, Cheryl, some of the other nurses, I will tell you, you can read a lot in the book, but when you have someone put their hand on your shoulder and they tell you that you're going to be okay, you know, that they're going to watch over you, that they're going to be vigilant about what they do. And they're not just saying it because, you know, they're looking at you in the eye and you can tell that they're going to watch over you. And that's exactly what happened. I went up there, you know, filled out large amounts of paperwork, but then I eventually went off my meds. And I actually was there was a young gentleman that asked a question, like, what was one benefit that you could get being in this particular study? And it was wonderful for me because the past couple of years I have been taking my meds. But I always thought, like, geez, if I miss a day or two, like, what's going to happen? So being involved in this study, I believe it was about 4 weeks before my viral load came back. So that gave me some peace of mind that if I went to visit my parents or something and I forgot my Descovy or whatever, that a day, and I'm not trying to encourage anyone to miss a dose. That's not what I'm saying. However, but it gave me a peace of mind. And sometimes just that really helped me, that missing that one dose was probably not going to be life-altering. But the study was amazing. When I did hit that peak of 1,000, which Dr. Lee had spoke of, you know, I was a little paranoid. I was looking all over my body like I had a tick on me or something to see if there was something that was going on. Was there something that, you know, because the viral load was building back up in my body? I originally had thought there was, you know, I was like, is there a rash on my chest or something? But I don't know, I was probably just flirting with the nurses and whatnot. I really didn't have any side effects from coming off my medication, and I'm currently back on my medication regimen, and I feel wonderful, and I am just so blessed to be around so many knowledgeable people, and even the folks, the gentleman who said, you've been positive for 25 years. I spoke to you. The first year I became HIV positive at the AIDS walk on a bench to the left of the hat shell, and I remember you well. So thank you for that, and please don't ever think that if you're not involved in this study, it doesn't mean it doesn't help. You don't help someone, because your words of wisdom on that day meant a great deal. So thank you.
Wow, thank you. Mario, the same thing. A little bit about the study.
So I was involved in a study at Beth Israel Hospital, and it was called PGT 121. It's a try to remember this now, a monoclonal antibody study. And so what this study does is basically there's antibodies fight bacteria, and they fight infection, and they fight the virus. And so this study involves taking the antibody. This antibody is manufactured, and they put the antibody in a person, and then they monitor to see what it does. But the intent of this particular study was to see how much of this antibody can they safely put into a person before something happens. So this involved me going in for a screening, a 2-hour screening, and signing the consent form. I had a really great doctor, Dr. Boris. I don't know if he's here, but he was really, really great. And he took his time. It's a long process. It's a big, long form, a lot of legal terms. But he was great because he broke it down, and he made sure I understood. There was a period where he said, So now I'm gonna hand you the document, and you have to read it. And, you know, when someone hands you, you know, a half-inch pile of paper, your instinct is just to finger through it and sign it, because you don't want to inconvenience them, and you want to act like you really know everything. So that's what I did, you know. I quickly went through it, and I was like, yeah, I think I'm good. And he said, no, read it, take your time, take your time. So I acted like I read it, and little by little I went through it, and he was just so good, I gained trust in him, right? Because we actually built a little rapport. He's a very nice guy. So I signed it, that was the screening, and then the next part was to get the infusion. And the infusion involved going to the hospital very early in the morning in a hospital room, and they give you the infusion through an IV. And so this antibody that was manufactured goes into my body, and I have to stay in the hospital until midnight. So early in the morning till midnight. It's a long day. One of the things I did was I talked to my best friend about this before as I was, you know, during the initial consultation. And I went home and I said, you know, yeah, I'm involved in the study and I'm going to do it and this and that. And he's positive. And he was like, wow, that sounds amazing. I want to do it. So we ended up both doing it together. So we were in a hospital room. His bed was next to mine. We brought our computers, we bought board games, we bought snacks, and we laid in bed and got this IV injection. And we had a lot of fun. All the nurses were hoopla and laughing, and it was a really interesting experience. We actually made a really good day of it. So then after that, there is every day for 5 days. I could be a little bit off on some of the days and stuff, but every day for 5 days, we had to go back to the hospital for about a half-hour visit. They draw blood, and they take the blood and urine, and they send that off to the lab to see how much of that antibody is still there and what that level of the antibody is. So the first day, the second day, the third day, they want to see where the antibody level is. So that was for 5 days, and then after that, there was 10 more visits over the course of 6 months, where I would go back with my friend every single time. We would call up, take time off of work. I am a construction worker, so I would like take the morning off. I work for myself, fortunately, so I talked to the boss and he said go. And I would take the morning off and I'd go over to the hospital and, you know, do the half hour. And during that time, there was blood draws and urine tests and just checking in. They would check, how do you feel? What's new? You know, any bruises, any marks, anything? Because they want to see how much of this antibody you can be sustained in the body without any negative side effects. I will say, so just in closing, I will say that there's a couple of pointers that I think are really important. One is when you are involved in a research study, it's super important for you to advocate for your own benefit. You have to realize these nurses and doctors are very busy people, and there's a lot of confusion at times. So you have to ask for things that might make you feel more comfortable. So one of the things that happened was during the blood draws, I was getting a bruise. And it was in the summertime, so I was walking around with the t-shirt on, and I would have bruises. So I just said, the next time I went in after the bruise, I went in 2 weeks later, and I said, you know what? I need to, we can't keep having these bruises. I want a nurse that's highly skilled, like a good, you know, someone who really knows how to play darts. I want a good nurse that knows how to do a blood draw, and I also want ice every single time. Absolutely. It was almost like they all ran out of the room, and 3 people came back, each with a bag of ice. And every time we both showed up, they did that. I'm telling you this story is because it's important to advocate. It is a wonderful thing to volunteer. It's really, really, really important that if you become a volunteer and a participant in a research study, that you have to go through the whole thing. Some of these last months or a year. I'm about to engage in one that's going to be a year. So in order to get through that year, you have to make sure that you're comfortable. You got to make sure that there's parking. You have to make sure that they're there on time. There were a couple occasions when I was there, my friend was there, but the nurses weren't ready for us. Yeah, I let them know. I gave it to them. I said, listen, we're here on time. If we can be on time, you can be on time.
Good for you.
The next time, they were there on time. Like,
Yeah.
your time is super valuable, and their time is super valuable. I respect them. I'm there on time. They have to respect me. And they just need a little wake-up call every once in a while, and that's okay, right? We all do that. So my recommendation is to advocate for your best, in your best interest. Advocate for what you want. There are times when I said, I got there and they said, oh, what's going on? I said, oh, I'm so hungry. Boom, they went off, got crackers and food for me, brought it back. So make it comfortable and ask for it. And
What does ice do?
so ice helps with the bruising. So if you put compression on after they draw the blood, if you put compression on it with a bag of ice, I discovered, I didn't know, they told me, the next day, no bruises at all.
So you didn't know that? I didn't know that.
Yeah, and one time, I'll tell you the truth, one time I went there was a very novice nurse, and she did a blood draw, and after 2 attempts, and I had big old veins, 2 attempts, she didn't get it, I kicked her out of the room. So that's it. Sweetheart, I love you, you're a dear, but no thank you. Get somebody else. They went and got somebody else. Dan came in and, so these are the things, when, they tell you to do some of the stuff, it's an extraordinary thing you're doing. And it's not easy. You have to understand, there's a ratio with the amount of complexity to these research projects and the amount of how much you have to give. And the more you give, the tougher these projects are. And you have to do whatever you can to make it comfortable for yourself, or else you're not gonna last. Also realize, and I don't know, none of the doctors mentioned this yet, maybe they will. You also have to realize that these projects last, say, 6 months or a year. If you go 3 months and stop and don't show up anymore, all those 3 months, all that data that they have for 3 months is pretty much useless. So I give you my advice. Think about it carefully, and once you come to the conclusion that you're interested, commit yourself to it. Take it serious. These people are spending millions of dollars. My research was done by Bill Gates, of all people, right? Bill and Melinda Gates put up the money for this research. That's a lot of money they put up. These doctors work really hard on this, and there's nothing worse, and I've seen this happen, because now I'm working with them as a volunteer. I see it happen. People go 8 months and they stop. What good is that?
Okay. Ed, you talked about having to stop your meds. I know that as somebody who's been living with this thing for a long time, I would be really hesitant to do that. And that's a little scary. What made you decide to go ahead and do that?
Well, in complete honesty, I walked up 2 flights of stairs, and there was also a cash initiative. So,
Okay.
so I mean, that is one part. However, once I was up there, and once I was speaking with some of these individuals, like I said, I grew up in the 80s, the early 90s, and like so many people have spoke about, there is a greater good. And sometimes it's so hard for us to see that when we're dealing with multiple issues, from, trying to remember to take our own meds, to try and take care of ourselves. That is so challenging. But one of the best things that being in a study and trying to help out other individuals is really what it gives back to you. It was incredibly selfish in one sense. I got so much speaking to these nurses. I got so much speaking to Dr. Sachs. On one occasion, Dr. John Lee gave me some information where he said, Earl, there hasn't been one documented case of where someone who is undetectable has ever infected anyone. And that took a lot of weight off my chest. And I'm not saying I needed to go out there and, try and test the waters with that statement, but let me tell you, it made me feel a little bit more desirable. Like I was okay to be touched. And I said this to one of the nurses the other day. Having that knowledge, I was like, someone can come up, and you know what? I'm okay if they hug me, because I'm not going to give them anything. Now, you may call that naive, but that still lingered in the back of my head from what I learned as a small child. So ideally, it's what this study gave back to me. And it gave back so much more than the cash. I'll just end with, I truly believe that there are heroes everywhere. And some of them don't wear a cape. Some of them don't have bracelets like one of my favorites, Wonder Woman, had. But I think a lot of people, if you're here in this room and you're HIV positive, you have one superpower that perhaps others don't, and that is your ability to look at yourself in the mirror and to look at your disease and to look and see and ask yourself, what can you do? What can you do to help yourself? Each one of you are a hero. I really don't define myself as one. I honestly don't, but I do believe that if anyone can help someone else. If you've been HIV positive for 25 years, you know what? Reach your hand over to the person that's been positive for 3, that is so scared, and they just don't have the knowledge. 25 years living with HIV seems so absurd to them. And if you're someone who was diagnosed a year ago, reach out your hand to the person that was diagnosed 2 weeks ago and just give them the hope that they have a life ahead of them. And that's why I did it. That's what it grew into. That's not how it started.
It was well worth it.
Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
First of all, I would like to, for you to check with me later on, because I know some studies in buildings with elevators.
I want to say, we have an elevator, he just doesn't yet.
Sure.
And second of all, what do you all think, the panel, what do you think is going to come first, the cure or the rid of stigma?
Well, I think that the cure will come before the stigma goes away, by far. See, the ignorance is very difficult to overcome, and we're dealing with it in society. Ignorance is just pervasive. It's beyond me that today, people won't date someone who's HIV positive. It's beyond me. And I live my life as an openly HIV positive people. Everybody knows. I mean, not, the guy at the grocery store, but anybody that, knows. That's beyond me. I just don't get it anymore.
My grandmother said, too bad a closed mind don't come with a closed mouth.
Yeah, all right. However, what you were saying about the cure, I just want to relate to that question to the research, right? Because this is really about the research. That's why I'm here, is to talk about research. You have to understand, when you are involved in a research project, it's not necessarily that one project that's going to result in a cure, okay? What happens is that one project might give a little bit of information, and that little information may help out something else, and then that helps out something else. Generally speaking, my understanding is that these cures don't just happen by one project. For example, my project involves how much of the antibody can be put into a person safely. So a success in terms of the PGT 121 would be an understanding, okay, we know that this amount of antibody can be put into a person safely. That doesn't cure HIV. But now, that goes to the next thing, and then okay, now we can give this much antibody to someone, now we can do another research project to find out if it's this, and then this. So it's like, it doesn't just take one nail to build a building, it takes 1,000,000 nails, but every single nail is equally important, right? So what you're doing has a cumulative effect, right? So the cure from research comes from a lot of different research projects in a lot of different ways. And also, one last thing, a failure in a research project is also a success, right? So if they're looking at it, if they're doing a research project to discover whether this drug might help solve or resolve HIV, and they find out it doesn't, that's a success, because now they can wipe that off their table. We don't need to focus on that drug anymore. Now we can refocus our energy on something else. So success comes in many different ways. And again, that whole concept of like every little bit helps, and being part of a research, it's incremental.
Julia?
I'm going to go to the mic here, although I believe people can hear me. First of all, you mentioned Mario and, I'm sorry.
Earl.
First of all, you are heroes, okay? I'm listening to your story. You may not be running into burning buildings or getting a cat out of a tree or a dog from a pipe, the drain pipe, but you're the kind of heroes that I truly admire. And what you're doing, the courage it takes to do what you're doing, to take that risk is amazing, and I love hearing your story, so thank you. Larry, you're a hero too, and you know that I know that about you. In fact, I've been doing an annual World AIDS Day event. I did lapse the last 2 years due to the finances, but one of the things that I incorporated was the Getting to Zero heroes, because people who come out and share their stories, or who take the time to get into a study, that the kinds of studies that you're getting into as well, are heroes to me, and I wanted to acknowledge people who don't tend to get recognized. And I have this ad in my head now, like, there needs to be, like, this kind of thing made public. I really believe that. I'm a person who's been living with HIV 30 years. I'm out too, and it's just fantastic and free. I'm also in a study, and again, the courage it takes to take something. All the years that I've been doing studies, I would never take anything, because I was afraid. I am in a study now. They're looking at a drug called teduglutide. Took me a long time to get that name to be able to say it. And but they did tell me it was a drug that they were using for cancer research. They want to see if it has the ability to reduce inflammation, which is a problem with people whose immune systems are affected. So I'm actually taking a baby step, but I think the courage of taking something that, in your body that you don't really know the impact of is just amazing. Also, Earl, you talked about privilege, and Mario, you talked about advocacy, right. And I'm getting ready, I'm doing a play, I'm writing a play, we're in the process, and I have one of my actors here. And Larry's been a spokesperson at my events as well. And we want to talk about research in the community, because when you talked about privilege, I think I heard in my head that you know and you expect to be treated right, and that they're there to support you and make sure you're safe. And when you talked about advocacy and you could get what you wanted, there's where that privilege is. I'm going to be talking about the black community and our relationship and history to research. So thank you for sort of bringing those points forward. And I want to know, and Larry, maybe you can address this, how does it look for people of color to get into a research study where they may not feel they're being taken care of, and where they may self-advocate, but they get either dismissed or not responded to adequately, and how we overcome that. So thank you for your comments. Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julia.
Okay.
Just to respond to the back half of what you said. I absolutely was going to say that, because we are talking about research, that I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the fact that for people of color, clinical trials have always been an issue. And there is a matter of trust, and that is real. And of course, historically we're talking about stuff that happened, 50, almost 60 years ago now. But the fact remains it did happen. And people would argue that it still happens in other places in the world. So yeah, that's real. And I think, you know, I want to say to the researchers still in the room, that that is part of your reality, that, you know, this is something that you are going to have to deal with. If you will, if you, first of all, you need to outreach to communities of color, because if your research doesn't cover the entire community, then, you know, how am I to trust what you're telling me is going to work? Did it work for people who look like me? You know what I mean? And that's a real question for folks. So, you know, I don't want to belabor that point, but I think it's, I'm glad that you brought it up, because that's as real as anything else in the room. So thank you, Julia. David.
Okay, I'm just going to say this, and I'm going to try to do it, because I'm a person that can talk and talk and talk. You just don't know.
I do know. I know you well.
Larry knows me well. You don't want me to have this mic. Even my pastor knows. Don't give him no mic. So first, Earl, I want to really thank you so much for actually allowing me to encourage you the day that I met you at the AIDS Walk. As you know, at the time, I really couldn't see you, but I'm glad that I was able to give you some encouragement, because that's what this is all about, encouraging somebody else, whether they're living with HIV or AIDS. And I'm going to just say something real quick about myself. I was diagnosed in 1993. I was told that I had 3 months to live because my viral load was in the millions. And I was working 2 jobs. And the doctors were amazed that I was working 2 jobs, never had no opportunist infections, never was sick with nothing. And they were trying to figure out how I was able to sustain. My T-cell count was 0. So they was amazed, and I see Dr. Sachs just like you do now. So I just wanted to bring that up, but I think it's real important. I'll let you all know I am actually executive director of an HIV/AIDS organization. We actually address the HIV pandemic in communities of color. And I really think it's important. I go to the Brigham. I've been going to the Brigham over 40 years. I'm actually 64 years old. I know I look good, thank you. But I want you, this is real important for people to understand, as Larry and I both know. We have to really address the pandemic in communities of color, because when people come to us with statistical data, they never break it down so that people in this room can understand who is most infected with this disease. And I'm going to say this, and I please nobody, I don't want you to be offended, because I'm real. I think it's important, we who are living with this disease, if you've had one opportunist infection, you have AIDS. That's what the CDC says. And you don't revert back to HIV. I think we need, when we're talking to people, don't say that I have HIV. Tell them that I have AIDS so they'll understand. And then you can explain to them what HIV is. And then, for me, I've been with AIDS for 25 years. I've never said HIV. I said AIDS because when they diagnosed me, I had opportunist infections. I had 3. And you will never hear me say HIV, and I think we do an injustice to those people who want to know more about this disease when we say, well, I'm HIV positive. Okay, what's that? Well, I have the immune deficiency to the virus. But you won't tell them that I've had several opportunist infections, so that when they go and look it up, they're going to say, well, that person really had AIDS. So we need to honestly be honest. And as I stated before, I don't get paid for what I do. I do all of this as a volunteer. We are probably the only one community of color, that actually is in the community of color, that does the National Week of Prayer for the Healing of AIDS. We do the AIDS Walk. We have a holiday food program. We feed those persons who are living with HIV and AIDS and their families. My church allows us to do things in our church. And the one thing I have to say, because I am a Christian, I don't think I would be here today if it had not been for God.
Go ahead, David.
Because if God was not in it, then I would not be here. Because if the doctor said no, And God said yes. I've had over 40 major surgeries. I've lost my sight to CMV retinitis. I've been blind for 15 years, but I want you all to know something. I still cook. I still travel by myself. I've been to Jamaica 4 times by myself. I go swimming. They let me drive a potty boat. So there is nothing that we cannot do if you put your faith in the person who created the heavens and the earth. Because when the doctors say no, God says yes. And as Larry said to the research people that are in this room, if you don't start addressing the communities of color that are most highly impacted by this pandemic, and you just keep going to the communities that are not of color, you are never going to know how we're dealing with this disease and how we can probably be a benefit to your trial just as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I've got time for one more question, and I'm going to go to the back of the room.
Age. Hi, I'm Les Grant, and when I said I wasn't a dummy, I'm a grad student at BC. And first of all, I'm HIV positive since 2008, and when I spoke earlier, what was interesting, I was excited to see Dr. Raj Gandhi because he was the doctor I was assigned to at MGH when I was first diagnosed, and within a matter of weeks, I was diagnosed with, him and his team diagnosed me with HIV/AIDS from the start, Kaposi sarcoma, and 3 weeks later, I was hospitalized in an isolation room for Kaposi sarcoma. And so one of the biggest things I can say, when I was diagnosed, I was a principal consultant working for Oracle, making over $100,000 a year in 2008. And within a matter of weeks, my life turned so drastically. And from just being diagnosed, my doctor at the time, it wasn't MGH, but called me while I was at site, at a client site at the capital of Vermont, and told me I was HIV positive. And 3 weeks later, met with Dr. Raj Gandhi, and his compassion. One of the things, if anybody knows, I've never had a doctor who sees me, who looks at me, and who understands what I'm saying, who paraphrases, who articulates, who can be silent, go through the motions, which has been fantastic. And part of this process for me has allowed me to realize that becoming proactive and engaging in my own health, to ask questions of why this happens, why that happens, because a lot of the times when I'm sick, I don't know enough to ask questions, or I don't have the will to ask questions. So the more I get better and practice at asking questions, the better I can advocate for my health and navigating the system, healthcare system. But also when I meet people who are newly diagnosed, I can help them as well in just being comforting and reaching out and telling them there are resources available. And these resources are, whether you make $100,000 and you're on now I'm on disability after 10 years, it really doesn't matter. What matters is I'm here because of the research that was done. With all of my diagnosis, all the opportunistic infection in 2008, had it not been for the people before me who did research for the medications to be where they were at, I wouldn't be here today. And so I'm truly grateful. And part of me giving back is being able to participate in these trials. I'm in what's called Reprieve trial at MGH. And I just took a graduate class, so I think I'm really educated. I took a graduate class of research methods and data analysis, and we were talking about informed consent, ethical informed consent and all that stuff. Well, it inspired me to go take out my informed consent from Reprieve, and I was laughing. It was 23 pages. 23 pages. But what's interesting is because I was interested now of the study I'm participating in, literally it has everything laid out, A, B, C, through. I never would have thought to think about reading an informed consent, but be part of being what in research is, educating myself, understanding, and that gives me a little more insight into my own particular study, which I can then advocate to have other participants be part of, so I can, really be part of my solution. Being proactive in taking part of, I would have never, I was at a research, interdisciplinary research conference at BC a few months ago. Now, I went to BC as an undergrad over 20 years ago. I was terrified about, talking about being gay, never mind, being openly gay. And 25 years later, I'm back at grad school. I'm openly gay. I'm HIV positive. And so the keynote speaker was a BC graduate, the former U.S. ambassador to the Vatican. And tons of people nobody asked a question. Nobody asked one question. So I was like, okay, I was in the back. And I was just saying that, the campus has changed. And like you, Ambassador, I'm also from West Roxbury, and I tried to relate to him. And then the minute I said, now here, 25 years later, I'm at grad school at BC, and the changes, I've changed as well. I'm gay, openly gay. I'm HIV positive with AIDS, and the whole room, everybody's head like this. But I was able to do it in a way that was non-threatening and saying the work that you're doing here right now, interdisciplinary research, is very important, because I wouldn't be here to tell you that I'm here. I'm the face of AIDS. I'm at Boston College, a Jesuit school. We have people who are HIV here at BC, and we have to, just be conscious of that. And so thank you for the work that you guys are doing, and thank you for everybody participating in the conversation.
Just to make a point on what he said, thank you. Before we close up, these consent forms are very complicated, and they're thick, and there's many pages to them. Don't be intimidated by that, but I strongly encourage you to seek somebody else, somebody that you trust, that might have a better understanding of it and understand the language of it, so that you can properly go through it, so that and that you also know exactly what you're getting into. So if you have a good doctor, bring that form to the doctor and review it with them. If you have a caseworker, that's a great idea. Bring it to the caseworker and say, hey, I need some help interpreting some of the legal language and the medical language. And it makes that process easier. So, even though these are complicated, these consent forms are complicated, and you break it down, have somebody help you out. And you don't have to use the staff at the research department to help that, because they are biased in a way, So you might want to go to an outside source, like a doctor, a nurse, or something like that.
Good point. Mario, thank you. Earl, thank you. Thank you all.